With the NBA being around for 75 years, so many things have happened in the league that not a whole lot of people know about. Especially with the NBA being around for so long, there are new fans coming in every single year and they're not going to know about these things. And with there only being a couple NBA Iceberg videos in the space, I wanted to do one myself, but not the normal one where I talk about things that are more mild. I want to talk about the things that many people, especially NBA YouTubers, really don't talk about. If you don't know how an iceberg video works, basically there are 5 layers which are determined by things that are mostly known by the public all the way down to the things that most people really don't know. I think that pretty much sums up everything I want to say. Let's get into the first layer, known as the surface level. The surface level is what most NBA fans know, and this is the first one we are going to be covering. Tampering is the act of an NBA player talking with other players to possibly join forces or get them to join another team. A good example of this would be the Miami Heat Big Three of LeBron James, Dwayne Wade, and Chris Bosh. To be honest, this is pretty common in the NBA. The league claims they have rules against it, but honestly, I've seen them do little to nothing about it. Sometimes they'll call it, sometimes they won't. We followed that up with Magic Johnson and his HIV. Before the 1991 NBA season, Magic Johnson would be given a physical when it'd be found out that he had tested positive for HIV. Now, the reason how he got this is pretty obvious because Magic Johnson was a little bit of a player back in the day. He would immediately retire from the NBA following that discovery. He would later return to the Lakers a couple years after when he was magically cured. To me, it's not a surprise that Magic Johnson was cured. He does have the money to get the best medicine that money can buy. And as far as I'm concerned, he's doing just fine now. We then go to the James Jordan murder mystery. On July 23rd, 1993, tragedy would strike as James Jordan, the dad of Michael Jordan, would be murdered. Some conspiracies would claim that it was a hit that was put on his father after a gambling debt and things of that nature. I don't think that's true. I really do think it was just a robbery gone wrong. Daniel Green, one of the people that was responsible for this, is set to get out in 2024. As for Mr. James Jordan, may he rest in peace. The final topic on the surface level is the Malice at the Palace. This isn't as much as a conspiracy as it is just really a dark moment in the NBA. Essentially, this was started when Ben Wallace would do a hard foul on Ron Artest when he would attempt to calm himself by meditating somewhere, and then a fan would throw a beer at him and then shit went down. I'm not doing the best example of talking about this, so if you want to see more in depth, 1, the videos out there on YouTube, but 2, there is a really good documentary on Netflix I think you will enjoy. This led to multiple suspensions and really put the NBA in a weird situation. It also cost Reggie Miller and Jermaine O'Neal a chance at winning a ring because they were easily one of the best teams in the NBA and they were for sure gonna win the East. A moment that still haunts them to this day. That was the surface level of the iceberg, which a lot of you probably knew most of these topics, if not all of them. We now transition into the shallow waters. In 2003, Kobe Bryant was accused of doing SA to a hotel worker after checking into a hotel. In 2005, the case would be settled for about $2.5 million, and this to this day still haunts Kobe Bryant. Even after his death, some people still brought this on him and made sure people were reminded that he did this. I like Kobe, he's one of my favorite players, and I hope this wasn't true when I heard about it for the first time, but honestly, I really have no idea. Next up, we look into Wilt Chamberlain's claim of having a body count of over 20,000 women. I'm gonna be honest, I don't think this happened. First of all, he claimed he started having sex at 5, which is just probably not fucking true. Although it was rumored that Wilt Chamberlain was kind of a ladies' man back in the day, I think 20,000 is easily a stretch. Next, we have the frozen envelope conspiracy. The conspiracy goes that in 1985, the New York Knicks were in desperate need of the #1 pick to acquire Patrick Ewing because the NBA was in a very bad spot because of other things we're gonna talk about in this iceberg. The conspiracy is that they used a frozen envelope to determine that it was the New York Knicks envelope so they could guarantee them the first overall pick. This is a pretty well-known one, but some people still don't know about it, and to this day, I still believe that this is true. Finally, we have Karl Malone and a 13-year-old girl. Yes, you heard that correct. Karl Malone had sex with a 13-year-old girl when he was 20, and this actually led to an NFL player in Demetrius Bell who would play for the Bills. What I think is crazy is this man wouldn't even take responsibility for either of his kids because he had 2 kids right after, and he just settled child support payments and did everything in his power to make sure sure he wasn't in his kid's life. When it was joked about on NBA meme tweets, he was a pussy and decided not to address it. This is the sole reason why I don't like Karl Malone and I refuse to address this man most of the time. Now we get into the depths where some of these things start to get a little dark. In 1970, most NBA players were doing cocaine and other drugs and things of that nature. This is the reason why I said earlier that the NBA was put in a very tough situation. It got so bad that in 1983 they did the Drug Act. They've used this essentially to cut down on the drugs being used in the NBA, and this still applies today. And I would say it's going pretty well. If you do want to hear a little bit more about this, they did talk about it in The Last Dance when they were talking about Michael Jordan when he got into the league. At one point, Isaiah Thomas was actually involved in a sexual harassment lawsuit. In 2006, Isaiah Thomas was accused of sexual harassment after firing an employee, and that employee claimed that he did it, and in retaliation, he fired her. The lawsuit would be settled for a total of $11.5 million. Mind you, this is when Isaiah Thomas was working for the Knicks. This next thing I've talked about before, and that's LeBron James and PEDs. Now, I said this in the video when I made this months ago, but please take this with a grain of salt because I'm not entirely sure how accurate this is. But when LeBron James joined the Miami Heat, he all of a sudden became ripped with muscle and he was just overall a different player. Also, there was some medical company that was selling these PEDs that claimed that a person with the initials LJ for LeBron James had someone by the name of M. Carter and Maverick Carter picking them up for him. And the side effects do include things like hair loss and cramping, so you can imagine why people had speculation about this. It would make sense to me, but at this point, I don't think the NBA really does care, and at this point, it wouldn't make sense for them to do anything. It would explain though why he's able to play for 30 fucking years. And the last thing on the depths we have is the Dion Waiters edible situation. 2019, when leaving for a flight in LA to head to Phoenix, it was reported that Dion Waiters fell asleep, and during that time, he woke up and had a seizure. The seizure was reportedly because he had a THC infused edible. He would go on to miss that game and would miss a couple other games after that, and his mom did come on Facebook saying it's not true and it's fake news, but no one really has an idea, except for obviously the people that said this. Now the first 3 layers are pretty normal things, some of them were kind of bad, but these next 2 layers are no doubt in my mind the worst. These are the more morbid things that I wanted to talk about. Also, these topics that I'm about to get into, I wanted to spend a little bit more time on them, so this part of the video for these final 2 layers is probably going to make the video a lot longer. This is where we dive into the fathoms. Len Bias was drafted in 1986 by the Boston Celtics with the 2nd overall pick. Now, a lot of you guys maybe haven't heard of Len Bias, and that's because he didn't have an NBA career, because just 2 days after being drafted, Len Bias would die due to a cocaine overdose. This was no doubt one of the most saddest moments in NBA history, and something that doesn't get talked about a lot that I think we need to bring up again is that Len Bias had the potential to be an all-time great, and not just a top 10 or top 25 player, he was better than Jordan. I know that sounds so crazy out of context because again, many of you guys haven't heard of this man, but I'm telling you, the stories I've heard, the things people have said, the stats, everything you need to see just shows that the NBA lost a really talented player, and he didn't even get to play an NBA game or anything. It was 2 days after he got drafted. Now, as much of a tragedy as this was, there is a silver lining to this. There ended up being a new law called the Len Bias Law that basically would put someone in jail for I think about 20 years if they do supplement a drug to someone and it ends up killing that person. According to my readings, it also did do a lot inside the drug war that was going on during the 80s, but listen, I am not in any way, shape, or form able to even talk about this topic, so I'm just gonna move on. Now, the Skirvin Hotel is actually something that I've known about for a very long time and I've always wanted to talk about. The Skirvin Hotel is the hotel that essentially the opposing team that is playing the Oklahoma City Thunder will stay at. It is said to believe that this hotel is haunted, and when you look at it, you really can't tell from first glance, but when you actually do a little bit of research, you can tell that this is more than likely true. Now, there is a story to this which I'm gonna read off straight from a Clutch Points article, and it goes as following. According to the legend, the first owner of the Skirvin, William Balser Skirvin, was not exactly a role model. First of all, he went by William Balser Skirvin, which apparently is like something to do with a potential serial killer. I'm not even entirely sure. Anywho, he had an affair with a maid at the hotel, and after getting her pregnant, he locked her on a top floor to hide her away, you know, as any any rational person watches flowers in the attic would do. The maid was called Effie by hotel employees, and she never left the hotel alive because of bleeping, of course. I don't know what the fuck that means. The legend claims that after having her baby, she went crazy from being imprisoned in the hotel and threw herself with the baby out the window. Now I'll be honest, I hate creepy stories like that, so that already is as terrifying as it is, but maybe it's an urban legend, maybe it's not true, maybe the place isn't even haunted. Well, a lot of players have came out with testimonies and have said many things about the Skirvin. People like Eddie Curry, who's like 7 foot and 300 pounds, Kyrie Irving had bed bugs because of it, and I think Derrick Rose had to stay in Nate Robinson's room. Mind you, he's from one of the worst areas in Chicago and he couldn't stay one night at the Skirvin. I'm not blaming him because honestly, I probably wouldn't stay in a hotel room alone if I was staying there. Also, Ron Artest apparently got touched somewhere and he was considering suing the hotel, which I don't even know how that goes. Now, as far as I'm concerned, Kobe Bryant never said anything about it publicly. However, during the 2010 playoffs, the Kobe-led Lakers stormed out of a 2-0 lead against a young Thunder team, and the series was then shifted to OKC. After the Lakers spent 4 nights in the Skirvin, they went home with the series tied. The speculation is that the Skirvin Hotel messed up Kobe Bryant and the whole team. I'm not sure entirely if that's true or not, but with the testimonies I've seen, it's definitely possible. I have one more story about the Skirvin Hotel until I move on to the next topic, and this is honestly probably the most creepy story out of them all. From the same article, quote, Bill Simmons spent a sleepless night in the Skirvin, haunted by a baby's cry throughout the night. Now, according to Bill Simmons, and this isn't in the article, but I remember hearing about this, he essentially said that he thought it was like his son or daughter or something, but then realized he was on the road. Now, as far as I'm concerned, I still think the Skirvin Hotel is an NBA hotel, you know, when opposing teams come to OKC, but I'm gonna be honest, if I'm an NBA player and I have to stay there, I'm staying at an Airbnb, dog. I'm not staying at that hotel. This next topic isn't gonna take too long because it happened very recently, and honestly, there's not a whole lot to say about it. Flip Saunders was an NBA coach for the Minnesota Timberwolves, and he coached from 1977 to 2015. Funny enough, he actually went to the University of Minnesota in 1973 for his college days. Now listen, there are old people in the NBA that do die, and I really don't think I've talked about them on this, and I'm not sure they're in the other tiers. However, it's important to note that the reason I talk about this is because he was coaching. I just thought that was really sad and really crazy that while a coach was in the NBA still doing his thing, he ended up dying. Now, the way he died was due to cancer. It was Hodgkin lymphoma, and what's crazy is the doctor said it was very treatable and curable, and he would continue to do his work while treating it. May Flip Saunders rest in peace. By the way, anyone that I've named on this that has died, may they all rest in peace. And finally, we have Jarvis Critton and his manslaughter charge. In 2011, former NBA player Jarvis Critton pled guilty to a manslaughter charge, which he would be sentenced to for 23 years. Now, you might have heard of the name Jarvis Critton, if I'm saying that right, after the whole Gilbert Arenas situation where him and Arenas brought a gun and they were basically about to shoot each other. That is a story for another time. Finally, we get to the Abyss, which is the darkest things of the iceberg. I'm gonna be honest, I didn't know a lot of these things, and some of these things are insane and you probably have never heard of them. By the way, if you're this far into the video, you should like it and subscribe to the channel. I make videos like this. And if you guys enjoyed this iceberg video, I might make a second one where I have even more topics than before. The Abyss is the final layer of the iceberg we're going to look at. First, we have the Pelicans owners at the time who got into a little bit of a scandal after trying to defend a church. Essentially, the Bensons, who had a lot of ownership in not only the New Orleans Pelicans but also the New Orleans Saints. They provided PR assistance to a Catholic church that was going against accusations of sexual abuse. Now, I will say, while doing research for this, it seems like most of the things really do have to do with the Saints and not the Pelicans. But one, the reason why I bring up the Pelicans is because obviously they had ownership in this, and number two, I think it's important to note that some teams are a little bit dirty behind the scenes. I mean, these are damn near billion-dollar organizations. Some of these teams have a lot of dirt behind them that you will never know about. And while doing research for this video, I thought she was fired or she just sold the team, but apparently she's still working with the Pelicans. And the Saints, by the way, she's also working with them as well. This was only like 2 years ago, and I'm not gonna lie, this is the first time I'm hearing about this. And they were only helping them in a PR sense. I don't think they try to cover anything up behind the scenes, but yeah. We have Mohamed Abdul-Rauf, who is also known as Chris Jackson, getting blackballed from the NBA. In 2014, Colin Kaepernick was under so much scrutiny for kneeling for the flag during the national anthem. This was one of the most controversial things in that time, but so many people had the question, why don't NBA players do this? And I think a lot of people forget that in the 1990s, this actually did happen, and it had the same effect, if not worse, on a player. Now, athletes and human rights did not go hand in hand back in the 90s, so that's why a person like Malice Abdul-Rauf wasn't really popular back then. He would be the first NBA player to kneel for the flag because of his beliefs, and he thought that the national anthem did not stand for them. Now, I use the term blackballed because that's what they call it, but it wasn't because he was black, it was because he switched to Muslim, just for future reference so we can move on. Now, funny enough, he only did kneel for one game and he was fined $32,000. However, the NBA came up with a compromise where he could stand, which he had to do, but he can close his eyes and look downward, which he would do to pray during the anthem while it was playing. Now, funny enough, we saw earlier this season Kyrie Irving participated in Ramadan, and actually it kind of became a meme, and honestly I thought it was very fascinating. I don't do Ramadan, but I still thought it was cool that an NBA player could do it and still perform at a high level. Now, during that time, Hakeem did participate in Ramadan and no one said a word about it. In fact, some people even talked about it in a positive way, but when Muhammad did it, he was scrutinized. Following the end of the 1995 season, the Nuggets traded him, even though he averaged 19.2 points per game and 6.8 assists, which was a team high for both of those categories. So he wasn't bad per se. In fact, you could say he was still really good, and he was only 27 at the time of this. His playing time decreased. He didn't even have a starting spot when he got traded, and by the end of 1998, he couldn't even get a tryout. He was 29. And you might say, oh, he only averaged 13 and then 7 the years after. Why are we even talking about this? He just clearly decreased. Well, by the time his second season came around with the Kings, he was playing half of the minutes he played in his prime season in Denver. Also, I want to emphasize this guy was the number 3 overall pick in the 1990 NBA draft, so it's not like this guy just came out of nowhere. He's been good for the longest time. He would play for the Memphis Grizzlies, who at that time were in Vancouver in 2000, but he only played like 12 minutes per game and averaged like 6.5 points. It sucks how believing in what you stood in would cost you your career, but sometimes you gotta take that risk. In the words of Colin Kaepernick himself, believe in something, even if it means sacrificing everything. And Muhammad Abdul-Rauf definitely sacrificed everything for the greater good. Birdman and the CP/catfish thing is something I don't even know how to really explain. Now, this all happened in 2012, but we got a lot of the news from a 2017 episode of MTV's Catfish. Oh, only if Manti Te'o knew. In 2012, Chris Anderson's house would be investigated by the Crimes Against Children unit because they thought he had CP. If you don't know what CP is by now, it's kinda obvious. Now, obviously, this went pretty public and it tainted his name so much that he got waived by the Nuggets later that season. Now, this is where things get very confusing, so wait until I tell you the end of this for you to have a judgment. So like I mentioned earlier, 5 years after this happened, it was on MTV's Catfish, and they talked about the situation in good depth on that episode. In 2012, Anderson engaged in a relationship with a woman from California who he thought was older than 17, but apparently she misrepresented her age. And during the Catfish episode, the woman actually goes into depth how things were just not lining up. Like, he asked her about some trip and she was like, I'm not going on that trip, I don't know what you're talking about, and I think she did the same thing to him. Overall, it was a weird interaction between the two. Now, what if I were to tell you that actually this wasn't Chris Anderson that set everything up? This was a woman from Canada who was like 29 who stole Anderson's identity, and she made conversation with the girl and was demanding things I'm not gonna say, but they're really bad. I'm just gonna put it that way. And somewhere along the way, Anderson was also introduced to this girl from the 29-year-old who pretended to be her, which I don't understand. Why would you do that? Like, what was the point of this? After they found out it was the 29-year-old behind this, Anderson's name was cleared, which I'm glad because he didn't fucking do it. I'll be honest, when I saw this in 2020 for the first time, I was very confused by the story, and I'm still a little shocked that this even happened. No, Chris Anderson is an innocent man, but those tattoos, yeah, not so much. Next, we have Quintel Woods and dogfighting. In 2005, at then Blazers forward Quintel Woods would be convicted of dogfighting, which honestly pisses me off because why the fuck would you make dogs fight? And also, you're an NBA player. You don't need to be doing shit like that. I mean, to be fair, no one needs to be doing stuff like that, but might I digress. What's crazy is he was only sentenced to 12 months of probation and 80 hours of community service. He also could couldn't get a pet during that time. Now as I'm doing research, they're not saying how bad it was, they're just saying he was involved in dogfighting. And all I'm gonna say is, why the fuck did Michael Vick get 21 months in prison and this man gets just 80 hours of probation? Again, I could be wrong. Michael Vick, what he did could have been way worse, and maybe this guy just went to a fight or something. I'm not entirely sure, but a bunch of pit bulls were removed from his house. I just want to say that. So yeah, fuck you, Quintel Woods. I think it's also kind of funny that this has been swept under the rug for years, and I've seen little to no one talk about this. I mean, he didn't go to prison, so I could see why no one's really talking about it, but still, it's fucked up what he did. And now we get into the saddest story on this iceberg, the Zeke Upshaw story. On March 24, 2018, Zeke Upshaw played in a regular season finale against the Long Island Nets, which is the NBA G League affiliate. He scored 11 points, and in fact, that win that team got, which they would win 109-99, would earn them a playoff spot for the Grand Rapids. Now, right as the game was about to end, Zeke Upshaw would all of a sudden just collapse on the court. He'd be taken off with a stretcher and he'd be taken to the hospital, where his heart would not start for 40 minutes. Just 2 days later, he would officially pass away. The G League would delay the first round of the 2018 G League playoffs, and the Pistons also gave him an honorary call-up on March 28th in a game versus the Wizards. Now, the reason of death honestly pisses me off, because how the fuck do you mess up this bad? Now, at the time, they just came out and said, oh, he had a sudden cardiac death, which would not be the full story. In 2019, it would come out that Zeke Upshaw had hypertrophic cardiomyopathy. Now, the reason why this pisses me off and the family of Zeke Upshaw would sue the NBA and the G League is because no one knew about this. This came out of nowhere. I mean, doesn't the G League have physicals that they do every single year? Like, how the fuck do they not find this? They found a tumor in Karis LeVert when he was traded from the Nets. You had one job, which caused the death of a man that was taken way too early. Rest in peace to Zeke Upshaw. And that was my NBA iceberg, or the NBA Darkest Iceberg, whatever you want to call it. This video did take like 50 hours to make, and I'm not even joking. This has been in the works for actually weeks when we're talking about scheduling and planning. If you guys do want to see a volume 2 or part 2 to this, then can we get this video to 1,000 likes? I'm setting a high standard because I know this video is gonna do well. If you like this really long form style of content, I did a documentary about the dark side of the NBA media, and I'm gonna put that on the screen right now. And as far as that goes, I'll see you guys in the next one. Take care, y'all.